Hi folks, Jonathan here again with my fourth update on the researches into the Upton area. And having previously looked at the foundation ceremony for St James's Mission House, we now come to its dedication service as it is recorded in the Torquay Times and South Devon Advertiser. The service had been advertised in the previous week's edition as happening on Saturday the 24th of October 1891, and there's an unsigned illustration of the new mission house along with a description. It is the following week's edition on Friday October the 30th 1891 which has an account of the service, but a quick look at the front page of the Torquay Times, which has the following prominent adverts. There's one for the Torquay Wine Company, there's Old Bushmills Pure Malt Whisky, which was established in 1784, there's Doomvera Teas in Drums, and then a change from drinks to the Rayford and Rollston Tailors, back to drinks, ales from Greenslade Brothers, and finally Dr. J. Collis Brown's Chlorodyne, which apparently was invented to treat cholera, but as it contained opium, was also rather addictive, and so I don't think you can get it now, really. On page 2, we find a meeting of ratepayers who are demanding a poll about converting a portion of the harbour breakwater, which was then being constructed, into a promenade pier. The demand for a poll was passed and the promenade pier was built. It is on page 3 that we find the article recounting the opening of St James's, which comes in at nearly 2,000 words. And it begins: the effective Gothic exterior, with lofty bell turret and shapely porch at the west end, of the pretty little building in the valley of Lower Upton, which on Saturday afternoon was formally dedicated to religious worship, will unquestionably be regarded by the people of this district as their church, even though it be called a mission house. We also are given the reason why it's designated a mission house and not a church. It goes: the reason for its not being consecrated, duly designated a church, and assigned an ecclesiastical district is that, beyond the religious services to be held there every Sunday, the building might be used during the week in various ways for the edification of the people and for the holding of social gatherings, a use which would not have been permissible had the building been consecrated. In other words, it was against ecclesiastical law. We then read of the hopes for the future. The mission house has been dedicated to St James, and in years to come, when the district has grown and become even more populous than it is at present, we may hope to see a church arise here, to which a parish may possibly be assigned to be known as St James's, and when the present building could be wholly devoted to secular purposes. There then follows a description of the building, which notes that the small but neatly appointed chancel and the lining of the vaulted roof with varnished matchboard give the interior a bright and cheerful appearance. And the chancel window is of 3 lights, and the subjects depicted on the ornamental glass with which it is filled are our Lord as the Good Shepherd in the centre, with St Peter and St Paul on either side. The original cost was estimated to be about £500, which was without seating, but in the end it cost £800 and provided accommodation for 200 worshippers rather than the 250 originally planned for. The article then moves on to the service of dedication and begins: in the midst of such gloomy and dispiriting weather as we have experienced now for so many weeks, Saturday, with its bright clear sky, proved quite refreshing and invigorating, and those interested in the movement were to be congratulated upon having so fair a day for the opening service, which was held in the afternoon. In other words, the weather had been pretty miserable for some weeks, but not on that day. And then the article, after listing the clergy who were present, we get a description of the service, which was fully choral, the choir of Upton Church being present in strong force and accompanied by Mr. Crowe on the very sweet-toned American organ, the joint gift of Prebendary Wolfe and Mr. Lavers. They led the musical portions of the service and also rendered with very good effect the anthem, Ho, Everyone That Thirsteth, Mr. S. Moore singing the lengthened solo which occurs therein with much expression. The anthem is actually based on chapter 55 of the book of Isaiah. The Reverend Prebendary Wolfe, the previous rector, then preached and took for his text the 16th verse of the 4th chapter of Ephesians, from whom the whole body, fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplieth, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, worketh increase of the body unto the edifying of itself in love. Or, in a more modern translation, from him the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love, as each part does its work. And we're told that the preacher gave a learned exposition of the text and in the course of an interesting sermon said that the occasion was one of very great gratification and pleasure to him. And then he observed that there was no doubt many good Christians in that neighbourhood who did not worship God as they did, but alas, there were many also who did not worship him at all, at least in public. The greater opportunities for worship which the erection of St. James's provided imposed greater responsibilities upon them. And the Reverend Prebendary Wolfe was not above challenging the congregation. It was a reproach of many a member of the church that he did nothing for the salvation of others. But the real Christian, he pointed out, could not be a selfish Christian, and he exhorted his hearers to use their influence with others to induce them to avail themselves of the services that would be held there. I'm not sure I've come across the process of inducing when it comes to evangelism. He then expressed sadness that William Lavers, the generous benefactor, was not able to attend the opening ceremony. He was terribly afflicted and had been suffering untold pain night and day for several months. And that day, instead of coming to that service, he had been obliged to hasten to London to seek advice and to see if it would please God to provide some remedy for his dreadful suffering. He hoped that it might please God to restore him to health so that he might come there and see the people worshipping God in that building, as he knew that that would rejoice his heart. William Lavers actually died 3 years later, so hopefully he was able to attend meetings at the mission hall. After the service, and that evening, a tea was held in the mission house, the chancel being screened by heavy crimson curtains, thus making a comfortable and well-proportioned room for social gatherings. Upwards of 250 were present at the tea, and to accommodate so large a party, it had to be served a second time, with a replenishment of the tables and a refilling of the urns. It was a marvellous tea for sixpence, the price charged for the tickets. And Mr. Hosking of Torwood Street, for old association's sake, he having at one time resided in this part of Upton, very liberally provided the tea free of charge. It looks as though at least 16 ladies were involved in superintending at tables, and then, after the repast, a couple of glees were sung by members of the choir and others, Mr. Crowe accompanying on the American organ, and a few brief addresses were delivered. The first of these addresses was by the rector, Reverend E.P. Gregg, who described the progress of the church's mission to the area, and then thanked various people for their generosity in making the building possible. The American organ had been donated by Reverend Prebendary Wolfe and Mr. Lavers, and the bell by Dr. Paget Blake. We also learn that Mrs. Paget Blake gave a very beautiful prayer book, Mrs. Gregg gave some alms bags, Mr. Chave had made the communion tables, lectern and desk, the Mrs. Gilbert and Mrs. Crowe had made some very beautiful kneelers, the Mrs. Ball some handsome hook markers and frontal, Mr. Smale provided shrubs for the outside of the building, and a gentleman at a distance from Torquay had given them the carved oak chancel chair. There were then speeches by the Reverend E. A. Wilson, Mr. Hemmans, and Dr. Blake, who complimented the architects upon the design and the builders upon the admirable work that they had put into the building, solid and good, and which he hoped would be the kind of work that would be carried on in the interior. So it sounds as though the building wasn't quite finished yet. But we are told, or then told, that Dr. Paget Blake concluded by reading a couple of interesting stories. One wonders what they were. Surely the editor could have found some more column inches to include them. And finally, the proceedings terminated with the singing of the doxology. And so the life of St. James's Mission House began, serving the community of Upton, both in terms of its spiritual and secular needs. This finds an echo in what the Devon Life online news website reported of a council meeting in September 2019. Pastor Pete Clayton said the Together Church, known then as the King's Arms, wanted to find premises to use as a base to set up a community hub. He told the meeting on the Monday night, "The heartbeat of the church has always been to make a real difference in the community." Interestingly, the Together Church was able to hold its first service on the 21st of March 2021, exactly 130 years after the foundation stone was laid. Given the COVID-19 restrictions, it did have to be live streamed on YouTube. So only a few members were actually present in the building itself, and until restrictions are lifted, making a real difference in the community is going to be somewhat limited. However, sooner or later, to paraphrase the Torquay Times, beyond the religious services to be held every Sunday, the building will be used during the week in various ways for the edification of the people and for the holding of social gatherings. And one final point, which is that even after 130 years and a change of medium, adverts are still mixed in with news items. In the meantime, if anyone has any comments, suggestions or questions, do let me know. Thanks for watching.